Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Crusher crew. I'm excited about this one tonight. I got to be honest with you. I tried to record this video a couple of times with my editing software. I've been having some computer difficulties. So everybody let me know if I get a bunch of screen lag or missing frame rates. I'm hoping if I just do this live, maybe it'll go a lot smoother. But what I want to talk about tonight is all of the historical evidence that goes back into the original psychic spy program and its origins and how all of that began and how it had key moments and key figures that occurred over that critical history that have led us up to now, where today we actually have whistleblowers coming out wide in the open as Delta Force operators, Green Beret Special Forces operators, nuclear commanders, and people who are like brigadiers in the Air Force, and they're stepping forward and saying that this is a real phenomenon. So it's pretty cool. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pull up this video. So because I had a presentation that I was getting ready to prepare, and we normally do this like as a premiere where we all just join in the chat together on YouTube. This is actually live. Like I can see my mom's in the chat over there. I can see Crazy Scott. I could see, look at this. I can even pin, I can say, hey, there's mom. There's Crazy Scott. This one is actually live. So good. It sounds like everything looks like it's not delayed. So we're all working out here. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do is I've put this together. It's sort of like a presentation. There's pictures and there's video clips. I'm going to be playing and pausing it as we go along, filling in some of the gaps and also paying attention to the chat and sort of discussing it. This video as a whole is an hour and a half long. So we'll see how far we get through it tonight, if we decide to cut it short or if we're just going to go for it. But basically, let's go ahead and start at the beginning. If you remember, like a week or two ago, I posted a whole video and we did a premiere where we went into a deep dive on the history of how a lot of people didn't know that Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell was actually involved in the psychic spy program. And so we're just going to touch base on that again really quick, and then we're going to get right into the whole thing and how it all fits together. It's pretty amazing. So in this photo, this is a critical piece of the puzzle, and we're going to go deeper and deeper into this because this picture was missing for a long time. And it is a photo of psychic spy Uri Geller, physicist Hal Puthoff, Werner von Braun, and then Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell all together. And Uri Geller has come out and told an incredible story when it comes to that photograph. He even says the name of who was there and who took the photograph, how it all happened and all that. So we're going to get into that. But there are some really important people like Hal Puthoff here on the left. Kit Green is in the blue jacket and the tie, Russell Targ and Pat Price. These are all the originators of the psychic spy program at Stanford Research Institute that started the remote viewing. Before that, though, was this guy, Andrija Puharich. Andrija Puharich was a researcher, a physicist. He was interested in lasers, in radar technology, and he was also fascinated in psychedelic compounds. He is the originator and the story that the entire TV show Stranger Things is based off of. That's on Netflix. That whole show is about a research facility in Montauk where these children were tested for psychic abilities. And during those experiments, the kids were exposed to light waves and radio waves and isolation tanks. And as they did that, the experiment interfaced with the kids in the community playing Dungeons and Dragons, and the imagination from the kids playing Dungeons and Dragons and talking about the Demogorgon created the entire upside down, or an entire realm that came into reality and is the entire plot of that show, Stranger Things. That entire show is based off of a true story called Montauk, the Montauk Project. And guess who was actually working at Montauk when all of those real experiments were going on? Andrija Puharich was. He was actually there. And his laboratory was up in Maine. This is an old documentary. I think it's called The Sacred Mushroom. And this is very early in his career when he was going down to South America and doing telepathy testing and experiments for psychic abilities by combining psychedelics like ayahuasca, magic mushrooms, and things like that to see if they could use either compounds, medicines, psychedelics, light patterns, radio frequencies, anything that they could do to take the human mind and basically open the third eye and achieve telepathic abilities. And this was all during the Cold War with Russia. So in this old documentary, it's really fascinating because you've got one of the original scientists that came out of Montauk, the whole legends of all of that, the beginning of this whole psychic spy program. And he started out going down to ancient, to locations where ancient indigenous people have lived for thousands of years. And he first initially went to the indigenous people and the shaman and tried to learn about their methods. And of course, before they understand meditation and the consciousness side of things, they're all looking at, well, it must be the magic mushrooms. It must be this. There must be frequencies. There's got to be something to it. And they're trying to.
Dr. Puharish?
During our stay in Hukila, I witnessed quite a number of cases of extrasensory perception by the brujos, some of which we could not film, as you know, John. These, in addition to the ones we did film, and the work which we have done since our return, convinces me that the mushroom contains a chemical which is most promising for the further investigation of extrasensory perception.
When this program began, the question was, were the claims for the mushroom true or false? Well, for those of us who made the journey, the answer is true.
And this is where it starts to get a little bit deeper and more interesting, because now that we've seen kind of some of what Andrei Puharich was doing and just a little touch of that, it's a very deep rabbit hole. We actually have on the CIA website valid evidence showing that him and Captain Edgar Mitchell, look at the bottom of the page, they actually submitted a paper that is part of the CIA documents now about direct brain perception and direct brain action. And it says in those notes over there, this is, here, I'll pause it here. This is written about Uri Geller. It says right here. And then up at the top, notice it says SRI. That stands for Stanford Research Institute. So those are the notes put on there. So there's the direct connection that we have between an actual scientist that was a part of the Montauk Project, the whole Stranger Things experiment, like the real one. I mean, there's some creepy stories that came out of that place. It's connected even to the Philadelphia experiment about how they hooked up frequencies and they made that entire naval ship like disappear, and it teleported and reappeared. And then all of the people on board of the ship were like melted into the metal and into the hull of the ship. And some people went missing and went crazy. And it's pretty wild. There was all kinds of different sorts of unethical experiments that were going on back in these early days. And honestly, in the current disclosure that's coming out, a lot more of this is starting to get talked about. And we're going to hear more about this, about kids being used for experimentation is going to start to come out a lot more. I think that Stephen Greer's even mentioning that with Danny Sheehan recently on some podcasts, and a lot of that interesting things that we've been talking about here on the Carl Crusher channel for like over 4 years now. So it's pretty interesting. But there's the evidence right there linking Edgar Mitchell and Andrei Puharich directly together, trying to submit research papers in order to get funding for this project. So they were directly connected. And this is kind of, whether you like it or not, whether you think these people are legitimate, whether you think they're hoaxers, or whether you think they're even like Israeli spies, that's up to you. But this is really kind of where the psychic spy program originated. So there you have Andrei Puharich with Uri Geller. Now, it's important to note here that Andrei Puharich found Uri Geller when Uri was a child, when he was just like a young boy. So we have no idea how young Yuri was exactly, and exactly what experiments were done, or if the entire story of Stranger Things is actually based off of these two guys, like Andrei Puharich and his work with Yuri is the actual story of the main scientist in Stranger Things, and 11, the little girl with psychic powers that was subjected to all these experiments. So it's literally like the exact same story, but these are the real people. So you have Andrei Puharich and Uri Geller. And Uri Geller is the same guy who used to go around on TV and try to do telepathy, to do spoon bending. He would try to bend silverware and everything with his mind. And so that was kind of the public side of it. But behind the scenes back at Stanford, they were actually doing real experiments where they were seeing if he could move magnetometers, if he could affect gamma wave signals and all kinds of stuff just by thinking about it. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into that. But knowing that these two started together is critical. Uri Geller says that when he first met Andrei Puharich, that they like walked out into a field together. Andrei Puharich left him alone, and then an extraterrestrial came and visited Uri Geller, and he had like a whole mystical vision and an experience. And then they became like colleagues exploring this whole thing. And we don't know if Andrei Puharich was just doing experiments on Uri Geller, or if he really did have telepathy and this was a genuine thing. And then it just got scooped up into the dark projects and kind of became a messy subject. So it's a really, really interesting topic. But the fact that these two guys are together is really critical, because when you hear the history of this, you hear a lot about Hal Puthoff and the remote viewing program, but everybody overlooks Andrei Puharich and all of the background history that he did. He actually wrote several books about Uri Geller. And not only that, he also wrote books about how during his experiments with Uri Geller, he achieved some kind of a radio frequency or technology that tapped into his own mind, and that he was started to suddenly channel and get clairvoyant messages from ancient Egyptian gods and weird stuff. And so we're going to get into that a little bit deeper too. But this is actually all of them together at the Stanford Research Institute. This is Uri Geller. That is astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell. There's Hal Puthoff. I'm not sure who the guy in the glasses is. It'll say in a minute. There's Dr. Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, and these other officials. They're all there. And there's other people there too. Bob Monroe from the Monroe Institute was also there. This is a picture from the old laboratory of Andrei Puharich. This is the actual story of where the show Stranger Things came from, is from this right here. They would have, this was the beginnings of it. They ultimately had entire rooms. And then this all evolved into not only SRI at the Stanford Research Institute, but also the Gateway Project at the Monroe Institute with Bob Monroe. But one of the physicists that worked with Andrei Puharich and knew him from the Montauk Project directly was this guy, physicist Dan Winter. And he has a whole YouTube channel. He's a plasma physicist. And a while ago, when I was hiking up a canyon, all of this kind of came together for me. So I put a video clip together with him talking about what really happened at Montauk, what they learned about ancient sacred sites like ancient Egypt, and how it affects human consciousness with contact with UFO.
It's true that when I was much younger, I seemed to have the blessing or the coincidence that I got to know so many people involved in these kinds of projects, like Puharich, Bentoff, Preston Nichols, Al Felix. I knew all those people incredibly well, actually. I mean, very well. What do you say? And I seem to be the Forrest Gump of the consciousness psychotronic generation. I'm not sure what that means. But anyway, since those stories were integral to my original upbringing and education in the psychotronic study of, electronic devices which are psychoactive, which I have been studying all my life from when I was graduate electrical engineering operator of the polygraph in the psychophysiology clinic at the University of Detroit, this was my life. So if I can be of service in trying to make sense of some of these stories and turn them into useful educational lessons, That's why I'm here, and we're here to empower, especially young people, to understand the pure principles which are empowering behind what on the surface look like messy, ugly stories. There is some self-empowerment here. So where do I start? Most of the people that I met, which ended up being intimately connected with the Montauk Project, and I must say I wasn't there very much myself. No, I lived in New York State, but all the people, it seemed like I was rubbing shoulders with every other day. Why? Well, I was an early speaker at the U.S. Psychotronics Association for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. In fact, my 1987
You'll get to the point here. Don't worry.
To the U.S. Psychotronics Association has gone viral 30 years later on my YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, talking about being and consciousness. I mean, we were scratching our heads about physics of consciousness for a long time. Anywho, so what does this have to do with Montauk? Remember, the central principle behind what psychotronics called a psychologically active electric circuit, the central principle is embodied in one simple conundrum, messy problem, which was, if you take a simple hunk of wire and touch both ends to your car battery, it's going to blow up and probably kill you. Now, however, if you take that same chunk of wire and wind it into a caduceus, up and down coil, think phase conjugation. I didn't know that a caduceus was phase conjugation till
Is the video choppy? Is it starting to lag? It looks okay on my end. And some of the frames might skip just a little bit because we're doing this live, so there might be just a little bit of a frame rate lag. But yeah, this is where he's going to be talking about it. We'll maybe let it catch up. I also picked the HD quality, so it might be a little laggy. Also, Google Chrome is just like a monster when it comes to like sucking up all your RAM. Sorry about that. Hopefully it's not too choppy. Let's see. Maybe I can, we'll just let it load for a minute, see if it comes back.
Many years later. But if you wind a caduceus and touch the same wire, the same battery, it's going to stay cool. But if you point that at
it
your
does
friend,
look choppy, doesn't it? I can kind of tell. Let me refresh this page here. 1 second.
Which was, if you take a simple hunk of wire and touch both ends to your car battery, it's going to blow up and probably kill you. Now, however,
is that still really choppy? The voice is not matching. I was afraid this was going to happen. See, even when I would try to record the video, to pre-record it and do this, right when I would get to the 18-minute mark or the 20-minute mark, it would get choppy and do this. So here's what we're going to do. This is my backup plan. I'm just going to tell you, okay, there's going to be parts of it where I might try to let the audio play again. You guys can let me know if it's all skippy, but we'll just let the picture do the work, and I'm just going to explain it. So it'll be okay. We'll just keep going because the information is worth it. And I know that I can do this. I can do all the talking. We don't need to rely upon the video clips. So what we're going to do is we're going to mute it, and I'm going to skip ahead. And so what he describes is that his time working with Andrei Puharich at the ancient sites and with Montauk is they came to an understanding that there was this electromagnetic field around the earth that went through the entire earth, that went through all physical matter. It went all the way through every living thing, including us. And there was longitudinal waves and then transverse waves as well that go out into space. So even though it's a little bit choppy, we'll listen to a little bit more of this. Yeah, Microsoft Edge is better. And then I even tried Safari, but it's not compatible with the StreamYard software. You have to use that. So if you guys are okay with the video being a little bit choppy, we can go back and just listen to it if you'd rather. We can do that. But basically what he explains is that when you go to these ancient sites and you immerse yourself into them, what happens is this sympathetic frequency occurrence where you have the resonant frequency of the electromagnetic field of that ancient site, like in the canyon. And what happens is that gets into synchronization with the brain waves inside your own mind. And when you immerse yourself in that brainwave and in that canyon, it opens up your perception to be able to perceive these alternate dimensions. And they're actually there, that there is some kind of a clairvoyant connection. There's actually real things there. So let's go ahead and check out the audio. Hopefully it will still be good here. You guys are all good with just playing it? Okay, here we go.
became eventually Deep Space Nine and Star Trek
Okay, here we
started that
go. I'm
day,
too far ahead here.
which became the story of the Nine. Well, how did that happen? Well, Andrea Puharich was studying how you use audio heterodyning in capacitors behind the ears. And if you perfect that heterodyning to be phase conjugate, you suddenly have a bit of clairaudience. Except Puharich didn't call it clairaudience. No, he simply called it, oh, how shall we trigger people's ears so deaf people can hear? But during the time that Andrea Puharich is patenting these circuits to use capacitors to phase couple capacitively entrain the bones near the ear and induce hearing in the deaf. He was expert at this. And the pictures I have, this is all in the slideshow, fractalfield.com/slideshow. You will see the pictures. Anywho, suddenly he's studying clairvoyance, and one day who's making the phone calls to him? This guy named Tom Atun. Tom. Who was Tom? Oh, turns out that was Enki.
Did you catch that? So he said that Andrei Puharich, during the Montauk project and his experiments, he was trying to work on these patents that he had for hearing aids, for hearing devices where you could put sensors or little nodes behind your ear, and it would resonate with the bones in your skull, and then you could hear like from a distance, like a walkie-talkie. And the story goes that when he started to experiment with this, allegedly he tuned into this parallel dimension, just like you hear stories about Nikola Tesla, and suddenly he was getting communication from who he considered the Nine. These were ancient Egyptian gods like Atun, Enki, Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus or whatever. He started, through bone induction and resonance, they artificially and accidentally opened this gateway through consciousness. Either that, or it was the moment when they decided to begin the entire PSYOP and start a whole new wave cult or a movement into this mystical belief of through occult rituals or meditations and things like that, through this gateway process, that you could actually access these ancient gods. And so maybe it could have been some of that. There's definitely people that believe that too. But it depends on whether or not the UFO crash recovery program is real or whether or not we're being psyoped or not. So let's keep going.
And this is where Phyllis Schlemmer, educated by Puharich, teaches what became eventually Deep Space Nine and Star Trek started that day.
Okay, so he literally means it when he says that too. Your favorite TV shows like Deep Space Nine, Star Trek, the show Stargate, all of those started because of Andrei Puharich was friends with the people that ended up writing those books and making those TV shows based off of those stories, including, we mentioned the show Stranger Things is 100% based off of Andrei Puharich and his work. When I showed you guys that picture earlier of Puharich and his laboratory with that Faraday cage and all the instrumentation on the table with the two other women there helping him, they had so much controversial stuff happen there that at the end of that institute, that place actually burned to the ground. And Andrei Puharich claimed that it was the CIA, that they came and they burned it all down to try and cover up his work and his discoveries. But other people have come out and said that they think it was the parents of the children in the community who thought they were sending their kids to space camp. They thought that their kids were signing up to go to like astronaut camp or star camp to learn about astronomy. And instead they went to Andrei Puharich's house and his mansion in Maine, and they got subjected to Stranger Things experiments where they were put in isolation tanks, given drugs and all kinds of stuff. So there is a theory also that some of the parents of the community got upset when their kids came back from space camp all schizophrenic or something, and the parents could have gone and burned that place down. So the history of some of this could be is a little bit messy, and I honestly think that's part of why disclosure on this topic is very very touchy, and why when people say show us the aliens, show us the UFOs, show us where you're getting this information and this data from, it's not that straightforward, because how do they come out and prove that without saying, well, we got this information through doing experiments with a bunch of kids that thought they were at space camp. That doesn't necessarily look that good, you know, as far as their legacy goes. So let's continue.
And I was kind of there. But actually, we want to get to that issue by understanding what happens when you survive compression. For example, if you go to a place called a sacred site where magnetic lines cross strongly and you have visions, which the Aboriginal would call songline or dreaming track. And this is a clue, because part of our understanding of soul and how we survive death is the electrical understanding of lucid dreaming. So at a sacred site, the reason you have better dreams and better vision and better telepathy, the magnetic line cross created compression. Actually, it's a very particular kind of compression. It's well known that the Earth grid magnetic lines cross
The
just
ley
like
lines.
this. Called anti-gravity in the world grid. Was first the Becker-Hagens grid. This is the grid of sacred sites where magnetic lines cross, yes? Like, for example, where the pyramids and sacred sites are located. They all fit this nest. So actually, this is a map of the major magnetic lines of Earth, for sure. Well known, actually, it's well proven. The pyramid sites, for example. So it has been measured many times that at these sites, telepathy is far more possible. And this was the work of Konstantin Korotkov and Kozyrev from Russia.
Okay,
And
so he just mentioned that if you go and like immerse yourself in these ancient sites like the pyramids or these canyons that kind of focus that electromagnetic field energy like a node, if you go to those sites, that it amplifies all of that. So imagine Andrea Puharich and the scientists behind the scenes while they're out on the surface making documentaries like we're exploring the magic mushroom and we're going to ancient indigenous people, visiting their village and understanding their mysteries. They're also taking that knowledge and going back to places like Montauk at these laboratories and facilities and saying, how can we use radar, lasers and frequencies and different types of resonant things in order to do this with technology? Or can we do it through the earth like a directed energy weapon or something like that? So it's all two sides of the coin that we have to take in here.
it's also been measured that at these sites, nuclear critical mass is reduced. Compression at these sacred sites is called a longitudinal node, because the longitudinal waves bounce in and out of compression at the symmetrical fractal nodes, exchanging inertia between transverse and longitudinal. So the longitudinal wave, you can't feel it unless you get to the center of compression, and then you can do what's called embed in the array, which is, that's why if you lie at a sacred site and close your eyes, suddenly you can see the whole hologram for miles around from the inside. You're inhabiting the array. It's why the Aboriginals called it dreaming track songline. If you have access to sacred sites or where magnetic lines cross, you can, it's called, you can use the DNA radio. And the frequencies there are a caduceus called the Schumann harmonics, which technically actually is a perfect caduceus. It's a caduceus of harmonics. That's what Schumann is, which is called a phase conjugate pump wave. It just means implosive. For example, the pyramids use the Schumann harmonics, which is that perfect geometry of harmonics.
For non-scientists, please give an understandable explanation of what the array is.
Well, it's kind of
I
well
might
known.
just skip this part a little bit because he kind of just repeats himself a little bit redundantly here, and I've already explained it as well. But you get the idea here. We have the Earth is embedded in this electromagnetic field and actually made of different densities and waveforms of this electromagnetic field. And those go transverse and longitudinal. So they go horizontal and vertical out into space and all around and through all things. Like we would call it the ether. To us, it just looks like dark matter or a vacuum or emptiness. And we can't even really see it, but we can measure it and we can feel it. And what's interesting, what he's saying is that when you go to these ancient sites, sit in these nodes, or even sleep overnight, or sit there and meditate, you harmonize, just like two tuning forks getting into sympathetic frequency. You harmonize your consciousness, and then the signal of your consciousness jumps from the antenna of your body to the array, or to the bigger antenna of the whole canyon, which is where all that ancestral memory sits, like a library. All those people that lived there for thousands of years, and everything that they did, all their wisdom and knowledge suddenly comes through, and you feel it when you go to these places. That's why sometimes when you go there, it gets real quiet and you're like, woo, you feel the hair stand up on the back of your neck, and like something's watching you. And if you stay after dark, it gets even spookier. And this is 100% why we have places like Skinwalker Ranch, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. We have people like Jay Stratton flat out saying that they've seen non-human intelligence, and they saw it literally on their first day visiting a place like Skinwalker Ranch. That's literally how all this fits. I know it's a History Channel TV show. I know we keep talking about Stranger Things and Stargate and movies like Deep Space Nine or whatever, but these things are almost just like the public perception of what like may have really happened at certain levels. Either that or that's the psyop, right? Okay, so here we go. We're going to skip ahead just a little bit. That's pretty much what he explains, is how you can visit these ancient sites. So now think back for a second. We started all this in the last video focusing on this topic, in the beginning of this one, talking about Edgar Mitchell and Apollo 14, his trip to the moon and back. So this idea that you could go to an ancient canyon, immerse yourself, like, or sit in the bottom of the pyramids in Egypt in the king's chamber or something and meditate, and then receive messages from the ancient gods. And all of a sudden you say, oh, I understand what ancient Egypt is all about. I understand where they got this from. It comes through that ether by you going and connecting into it, just like you would plug into the Wi-Fi. And all of a sudden you're in the network and you're surfing the internet of the universe, you know, and space-time. And so what they did was Apollo 14 astronaut, he did remote viewing and did a secret experiment. He pretends like he didn't do it for NASA, but he's actually friends with with Werner von Braun and everything. But he actually did remote viewing 4 different times on his trip to the moon and back. So while he was in transit to go walk on the moon and on the way back, he did it 4 times. Listen.
It is now known. What were the results of that experiment? What'd you do?
Well, the standard sort of test that had been done in the laboratory by J.B. Ryan and other people for 30 years or more, I just simply conducted it in that environment. And I can only quote the results statistically because that's the way it was set up. The probability that chance could have produced our results was 1 in 3,000.
1 in 3,000.
So it was statistically a significant test.
So you had arranged, I guess, with somebody on Earth to be receiving, and you were going to 4 people, and you were going to send a message.
Mm-hmm.
What, mid-flight?
No, I did it 4 different times. Planned to do it more than that, but I had time to do it 4 different times during my rest period. It took about 7 minutes each time to organize the standard Zener symbols in accordance with random numbers selected from a random number table and copied onto my knee pad.
Mm-hmm.
And I organized the symbols according to random orientation of the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then simply thought about each symbol in turn for 15 seconds.
And the result was that it would have been 1 in 3,000. It could have been
that chance could have produced that result.
That result. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was very significant. It was quite in keeping with what scientists had found in the laboratory for 30 years or more.
Did NASA know you were going to do that?
No, they did not.
Had they known, would they have been happy?
Not particularly.
So there you have it. That was kind of the whole beginnings of it, and not the entire thing. We're going to keep going a lot deeper here because we're talking again tonight about the critical moments and events that showed the government and these secret programs that this phenomena was legitimate. and that these things could happen. So imagine that at Montauk, they came through all these breakthroughs and discoveries with Andrei Puharich, with this channeling, with this remote viewing, with the technology that they were using, and suddenly he's hearing voices from Enki and the Nine from Egypt, and they're trying to figure all this stuff out. So let's just take it at face value, like pretend like it's real, and it really happened, and these guys aren't lying to get like funding for their programs and stuff. Just imagine that it's real for a minute. So what they do is this secret experiment with Edgar Mitchell to try and see if it works all the way to the moon. So if you have an ancient sacred site and it amplifies your experiences, what happens if you leave the earth in the electromagnetic field of the earth? Does telepathy stop? Does it get worse? Does it get better? Does it get worse? And so he did 4 experiments all the way to the moon and back, and the results were statistically significant enough that they realized it didn't even matter if a guy was walking on the moon. He was able to tell what shapes and colors on the Zener cards were. So he was able to pass the telepathy test. It didn't even have to be on the electromagnetic field of the earth. So suddenly in this program, they're like, whoa, this is like a huge moment and a breakthrough. And so what happened was Edgar Mitchell came back from the moon and was fully vested now in this psychic spy program. He joined the team there at Stanford. He joined up with this Dr. Hal Puthoff, right here that you see. And then here he is with Werner von Braun, Uri Geller, Hal Puthoff, and Edgar Mitchell. And this becomes one of the huge critical moments. This photograph right here actually captures the beginnings of the UFO crash recovery program that combined finally with the psychic spy program, and how those two things suddenly merged, and why today you have people like Jacob Barber and his colleagues coming out that are Delta Force operators and Green Beret Special Forces guys saying that they use remote viewing and they use these same methods in order to take control of UFOs, bring them down, or crash them, basically through telepathy, they hijack the control systems, pilot the UFO down, and then these teams go in and capture them for Lockheed or something, Lockheed Martin. So it's pretty wild. But this is the first incident and the proof that if that program is real, this is literally the day that it all began. And we're about to hear the story of what happened.
This is Uri Geller. One of the types of demonstrations that Geller likes to do is to sit with a group of people and attempt to send a number.
Yes, Woodlove is saying these spots, really quick, these spots would be all over the planet. The ley lines are all over the planet. If you listen to the intro, the 30-second intro of every one of my YouTube videos, it's like there's a connection between the paranormal, UFOs, and consciousness. And I say that there are mysteries that uncover this secret, and it's even in your own backyard. It's right under your nose. That's even what Bob Bigelow said. All of this is through consciousness. It has to do with the mind and uncovering our own consciousness. So that's what we're going to uncover here.
To various people in the room. With Uri Geller, this is Edgar Mitchell, who, with his eyes covered, is trying to pick up the number that Geller is sending. Also, we see Wilbur Franklin of Kent State, Harold Puthoff, and Russell Targ of SRI, along with Don Schuick, Vice President for Research at SRI. This is the chart recording of the magnetometer fluctuations produced by Geller. We see here full-scale fluctuations of 0.3 of a Gauss, which is a significant magnetic field, comparable to the Earth's field. After each of these experiments, we would, in general, discuss the results with Geller, show him the strip chart recording, and talk about the significance of it.
That's literally Uri Geller and Hal Puthoff at Stanford Research Institute and the origins of this whole program. So they're seeing if his thoughts can actually affect reality outside of his body. Can he think about the device like the magnetometer on the counter in the sealed vacuum tube, and just by thinking about it, can he affect the waveform on those charts, and can he affect reality that way? And over and over and over again, they seem to prove that that was real and that was true, that telepathy, psychokinesis, and that kind of thing, there is something real to that. And truth be told, we'll get into this a little bit too, but Hal Puthoff, who you're seeing right here, he was the mentor and the trainer for my current colleague, Dr. Jim Segala, who has combined all of these devices like the magnetometer, the gamma ray sensors, all of this stuff that they were doing with Uri Geller is now part of what is called the Modular Unidentified Phenomena Alert System. And I'm actually his colleague, and we're teamed up on this. And we have 10,000 sensors that we're giving away for free right now. So in the link in the description box of this video, you can go take a survey. Everything that Uri Geller was doing in this video back in Stanford with Hal Puthoff has evolved, and today is this Modular Unidentified Phenomena Alert System study. We call it MUPAS for short. That's the acronym. But you can get a MUPAS device and actually join phase 2 of the study and know 100% confidence that it came from the origins of this actual program, and we're still doing it. Instead of it just being Uri Geller, we have 10,000 sensor units and a whole online software program and AI monitoring it and all of that stuff to track the data if this is real or not. So if you're interested in that, you should know and go check it out. Okay, let's keep going.
His experiments. He was very interested in the experiments we were doing because he had never taken part in laboratory experiments of this kind before.
Now, listen, you've already flagged the other major incident in your career that touches on UFOs. And again, Edgar Mitchell has confirmed a large part
This
of
is the same guy. This is Uri Geller now, and this is modern times. So this is recent. Ross Coulthart on News Nation interviewing the same guy, Uri Geller.
Story to my friend privately. During his lifetime, Edgar, the Apollo 14 lunar module pilot astronaut, was unwilling to say publicly that he'd ever had definitive proof of alien life. But privately, he confided in friends, and I've reported this in my book, that he was aware when he had experiences on the moon, he was aware that they were being observed. And he talked to my friend about blue lights that were clearly some kind of structured craft that were following the astronauts during their time in their lunar journey. But he also talked privately to people about something that happened, I believe, at the Goddard Space Center with Werner von Braun, the father of America's space program, the former Nazi, who I understand embraced you as a friend, even though I'm sure as an Israeli Jew, you must have felt very uncomfortable with his background. But it must have been a very interesting meeting. And I'm intrigued if you can tell me, please, the story of what transpired between you and Dr. Werner von Braun.
Okay, first of all, what Edgar Mitchell described you on the moon, that's a tiny thing. Yes, they were followed, but the big thing is, and Edgar says it outright, that a UFO, a craft, crashed on planet Earth. They pulled out bodies of aliens. And that's what Werner von Braun wanted to show me.
Really quick, if you go back and watch the video on my YouTube channel where Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, is the thumbnail, the first time we really dug into this story, we actually deep dived into the metamaterial, into a piece of UFO crash material, and we proved that Edgar Mitchell not only was the Apollo 14 astronaut that went to the moon and did the remote viewing experiments that helped start the psychic spy program, but he was also born in Roswell, New Mexico, and grew up a lot of his childhood there. And he was the guy that went back to Roswell, talked to the locals there, and was given actual smuggled crash recovery material that was given to the radio host Art Bell in Las Vegas, Nevada on Coast to Coast AM. He gave it to Linda Moulton Howe. Linda Moulton Howe then gave it to Travis Taylor, who's now at Skinwalker Ranch as his job. And Travis Taylor then gave it to Dr. Hal Puthoff. And Hal Puthoff has that metamaterial to this day with Tom DeLonge at To the Stars Academy. That's where it is right now. And it might even be this exact same piece of material that he's talking about here. But that was the incident. And it was Edgar Mitchell's, the same guy that went back to Roswell and got that material and was involved. So here's Uri Geller in the middle of all that. Edgar Mitchell was right at the heart of this whole story.
This is a photograph of Werner von Braun and me. He's taking me into his limo, and we drive off to a huge concrete building. But let me now backtrack. One day, Ed Mitchell calls me up and says to me, Uri, there's a very important doctor who wants to meet with you. I said, fine. He says he's a NASA scientist. I said, fine. Who is he? He says to me, he's Dr. Werner von Braun. I say, what? Dr. Werner von Braun wants to meet me? Dr. Werner von Braun was a Nazi. I've got photographs in the museum here. He's among Gestapo officers. I was shocked when Ed Mitchell told me that, but I couldn't resist. No way. So in the end, with some conflict in my mind, because half of my family were murdered by Nazis, I say to Ed, take me. We get to a NASA base, and by the way, at that time I worked with the CIA, and the CIA gave me a tiny Minox German camera. It's also hanging here on the wall, because I spied for the CIA in Mexico, because I was very close to the president of Mexico, and the CIA gave me some missions to do in Mexico. I take that little camera with me, and I give it to my brother-in-law. And I say to Shippy, his name is Shippy, short for Samson. I say to him, Shippy, when we enter Werner von Braun's office, you've got to snap a photo, because nobody will believe me. So we enter Werner von Braun's office. Mitchell is with me, Shippy is with me, and there was a CIA man with us too.
Hal Puthoff.
The first thing that Werner von Braun does, he pulls out of his pocket a tiny little piece of metal, and Shippy snaps. And
this is the photo. This is the exact photo that his brother-in-law Shippy took when he was taken to see Werner von Braun with Edgar Mitchell and the CIA agent, who is clearly Hal Puthoff, Dr. Hal Puthoff. And this is them looking at the thing. So let's check this out.
Asks me to touch the metal and tell him what I feel it is. So I place my finger on the piece of metal and I tell him, Werner, this is not from here. He says, you're right. This is a piece of a UFO. Okay, wow. Then he says to me, come with me. He takes me.
Okay, before we get to this part, because this part's crazy. The next part's totally crazy. But did you catch all that? This was the first time that we know of that a piece of alleged UFO material is handed to an alleged psychic. And when he touches that material, he has some kind of an experience where he knows that this is not from Earth, and he's able to retrieve information just by touching or being close to this tiny little piece. Again, imagine the breakthrough that was for them. To us, it all just looks like a photo, like they're just like hanging out looking at something that he's hanging on to. But this is someone who's been to the moon and done remote viewing. This is physicist and engineer Dr. Hal Puthoff. And you got Uri Geller and the head of NASA, Werner von Braun. And they just realized that through telepathy, not only does it not matter if you're in a laboratory at Montauk, it doesn't matter if you're out in an ancient canyon or in the pyramids, or if you're even on a spaceship going to the moon or back. If the person is somehow connected or has the ability to explore their own human consciousness, they innately have this ability to where Uri Geller, if this story is true, Werner von Braun brought out this little fragment of metal. It could have been a piece of tinfoil for all he knew. And when he touched it or looked at it, he knew that it was not from Earth. And then all of a sudden, Werner von Braun, Edgar Mitchell is smiling really big. They realize this is real. Like something about this material is interfaced with consciousness. Like something about the way that this material was recovered and even crashed had to do with that, with radio waves and consciousness in these early experiments. And so all of this is tied together. And it goes back to this exact moment when this photo was taken that Uri Geller had his brother-in-law sneak for him, was when it all began. When they realized that the UFO crash recovery material could be connected to with the human mind through consciousness. So they took the leading test subject for the psychic spy program there, and instantly he knew that it wasn't from Earth. So that was like a big aha moment for them. And so then it gets way deep.
Mitchell is with me, Shippey is with me, and there was a CIA man with us too. The first thing that Werner von Braun does, he pulls out of his pocket a tiny little piece of metal, and Shippey snaps. And Werner asks me to touch the metal and tell him what I feel it is. So I place my finger on the piece of metal and I tell him, Werner, this is not from here. He says, you're right. This is a piece of a UFO. Okay, wow. Then he says to me, come with me. He takes me into his private office, and there is a safe in the office. He opens the safe, and inside there's a bigger piece of metal, about this big, maybe 12 inches. He holds it in his hand, and he says to me, Uri, now place your hand on the piece of metal. Tell me what you feel now. So I place the palm of my hand on the piece of metal, and I immediately tell him.
Part of what I think he's leaving out of this story is I have seen black and white footage of alleged Roswell crash material. And there is not only like a metal I-beam that has like hieroglyphic symbols on it, like a language, but there's other metal panels. And one of them was a metal panel that actually had indentations like embossed into it where you were supposed to place your hands. Like you'd put your hands, and that's how through telepathy you would interface with the UFO or with the craft. And I've seen video clips of this. I didn't put it in this presentation, but I think I did. Maybe I did in the last one. I don't know. I will on another one if I haven't. But I kind of wonder if that's not what he put his hand on, if he put his hand on one of those panels from the Roswell crash. And it's really weird too, because the panel, I think, has 6 fingers instead of 5. There's 6 fingers on the hand.
Werner, this is from a UFO. And he says, you're right. Now come with me. He takes me out to the parking lot, and this is the photo. It's an enhanced photo. Somebody made it, more color. And he puts me in a limo, says, sit next to me. I sit next to him. He gives an order to the driver to drive. We drive into the heart of the base. We come to a concrete building. Nothing is written on the building. There's a soldier standing by the door. He opens the door, and Werner says to me, follow me. We go down 3 or 4 flights of floor into the abyss of the building.
Is it just you?
No, just me and Werner von Braun. Then in the corridor of that 3rd or 4th floor, there are hooks on the wall, and on the hooks are hanging orange Antarctica coats. You know those warm coats that you wear in Antarctica? They're orange in color, but they all had a NASA logo on. He says, put one on. And he puts one on. I don't know what the hell.
Correct, right? You bring up a good point there. That Chris Bledsoe also talks about how people from NASA came to him, that they showed him a piece of material, and when he touched it, said the same thing. That's not from Earth. That's from somewhere else. That's from a UFO. And that the NASA representative looked at him and said, why you? That's literally what he said to Chris Bledsoe. And Bledsoe's a good friend of mine.
Is going on. And then we turn around the corner. We come to a huge metal door. He opens the door, and I see an enormous refrigerator. It's cold. I walk into this cold space, and listen, Ross, I'm definitely not an idiot. And I definitely was not hypnotized. With my own eyes, I see alien bodies. Some were mangled. They're all in glass tubes. I mean, I'm just mind blown, shocked. I was stunned. I froze, and it suddenly everything dawned on me in that refrigerator room that this is all real. Everything that I believed in, it's all real. What this is? This
Can you describe those bodies to me?
very similar to the alien figures that we are used to see, the grays. Look, most of them were mangled. Yeah, most of them were like they looked like they were pulled out forcefully out of a craft, or just, I don't know, found strewn around the UFO. But it was mind blowing. Just, I mean,
what did Werner tell you about where those beings came from?
He didn't. We went back to the office. Ed Mitchell was there. Werner gave me a gift. He gave me it's here. I have the camera here. It's a German camera. He said, Uri, you can have this as a gift. I took it because I said I wanted something that belonged to Werner von Braun. And that was the end of the story. So, but it happened. You understand that this is what I'm astonished at. That this is 50 years ago, Ross. 50 years ago, and the Americans are still sitting on this secret. What's the big deal?
It's funny. As we're talking, my friend, just in the last few days, I've interviewed the former UFO investigator for the Pentagon, Luis Elizondo. And he's gone public with me on an interview with News Nation, where he's talked about the fact that the Roswell crash in 1947 was the crash.
So check it out. He just mentioned Lou Elizondo, right? That he has talked to him about the Roswell crash and his involvement. And again, so let's just pause this. We're going to revisit this video clip here in a little bit too. But look who's in this picture together. You've got, again, Dr. Hal Puthoff. This is, I think, the former director of Lockheed Martin. And there's Lou Elizondo all together. Okay, so the connections here, we have to keep track of the people on the names and how this weaves together like a tapestry. But I'm telling you, when we think about the Men in Black, we think about the UFO crash recovery program and the psychic spy program, we imagine it being like spooks that live in some invisible realm. Like we never see them and they never come out of their underground facilities. But the truth is, it's just a small world. There's not a whole lot of people in this country that have the level of physics, advanced quantum physics understanding and laser physics understanding and consciousness to even face all of this. There's probably less than, 10 to 20 people that are even qualified, and even less than that would want to, so it's pretty wild when you think about it. It's actually a pretty small group of people that connect these dots all the way up to today and what's going on. So they were literally all together. You've got Hal Puthoff, and there he is in the original photo with Edgar Mitchell and Uri Geller, and there they are. There's Hal Puthoff. And even to this day, I just showed you the photo, and we're going to see video clips where Hal Puthoff is working directly with Lou Elizondo, and a lot of this stuff going all the way up to Washington, D.C. So Hal Puthoff has been there since the beginning, and he's kind of the next piece of the puzzle, aside from like Lou Elizondo. We're not going to get into Lou that much. I honestly would like to get him on here for an interview so I could ask him about a lot of these connections. But there he is actually handling the material in this video. There's Lou Elizondo. There's an actual piece of alleged metamaterial. There was Linda Moulton Howe with them, which I mentioned was part of that transfer. So we saw, you didn't really see her, you just see her hands. We'll back it up again for a second here. But you've got all of these guys at the meeting, and then when they get back, watch this video clip and see who all is involved here. You've got Lou Elizondo actually handling the metamaterial. There he is, like he's signing over a transfer, like a legal transfer, where now this is going to belong to the Stars Academy. And where is he getting it from? He's getting it from Linda Moulton Howe. That's who that is. That's her hands. Linda Moulton Howe. And so Linda Moulton Howe, remember, clear back in the beginning, she worked with Art Bell at Coast to Coast AM, and she was the originator that took the metamaterials called Art's Parts that allegedly came from Roswell. So somehow they ended up, there it is, there's the piece of metamaterial. They ended up going from Edgar Mitchell in Roswell to Art Bell after Art Bell did an interview with Edgar Mitchell in Las Vegas where they talked about remote viewing on the moon and they talked about Roswell. All of a sudden, a shoebox shows up at Art Bell's desk that has parts and a letter, has aluminum or metal looking parts in it, and a letter saying that these are from a UFO crash from an anonymous person, probably Edgar Mitchell. And this is that piece of one of those little pieces of materials. And Linda Moulton Howe, when she very first publicly came out to talk about it in this presentation, she holds up a tape recorder and she said, the first thing that I did was sent the metamaterial after I was on the radio and we talked about the metamaterial and how it was showed up in a shoebox. A physicist called in from the DIA and said he would like to analyze it. And who was that analyst and who was that scientist from the DIA? It was Travis Taylor. This video clip was actually Travis Taylor running electromagnetic field experiments on this metamaterial. And he claimed that when you would try to interact with it or even touch it or sometimes even think about it, that this piece of metal would lift up off of this insulator thing that he created, like static electricity insulator thing that he made, that it would lift up and move around like it had anti-gravity clear back then. This was before he worked at Skinwalker Ranch, before he was even involved there or anything, but it was definitely him. And I actually texted Travis Taylor when I saw this video of Linda Moulton Howe and she mentioned him. And Travis Taylor's reaction to me was, yeah, everybody says it was Hal Put. He goes, yeah, everybody says it was Hal Putoff that tested it first, and nobody gives me credit for that. That's literally what Travis said to me when I asked him about the metamaterial, but he was actually the first one to test it. So, and the other fascinating thing is Travis Taylor has written a book about the law of attraction. He has published a book called The Science Behind the Secret, which is an entire book about using your mind and meditation in order to manifest the life that you want. And he actually has published a book called The Science of the Secret about manifestation and the law of attraction. But he was legitimately the first one to test it. So think of how small. Oh yeah, I forgot. I was going to even put the screenshot of the book up. This is actually the book cover. And look, it's written by Travis Taylor, Decoding the Law of Attraction. Why would he write a book like that when he's in the DIA and he's working on the UFO program and now he's on the History Channel with the Skinwalker Ranch? Yeah, mentalism, right? It's like remote viewing and meditation, this whole philosophy of manifestation, of how consciousness is actually part of our reality and quantum entangled with it. He's literally wrote books about that stuff. And this is him testing the metamaterial clear back then. These dots that connect are so close together that we can't even see the forest for the trees, and we're looking for this mystery, and it's literally right in our face, and it's right on TV, and it's right in our pop culture movies. So that was definitely him. Now, here is the other fascinating connection. Jacques Vallée. We're going to jump a little bit to Jacques Vallée. I've got photos of Jacques Vallée riding around visiting Skinwalker Ranch. We've got photos of him involved in Robert Bigelow's metamaterial research in Nevada at Mount Wilson. And we know that he was involved in the filming of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind with Steven Spielberg, the UFO contact and abduction movie. And he worked as part of the connection with Project Blue Book with J. Allen Hynek, which I'm a friend of his son now. Paul Hynek is a good guy. But there's deep connections here where all of these guys are connected. But did you know that Jacques Vallée was actually there too? at Stanford Research Institute when Edgar Mitchell was there, and they were doing those remote viewing experiments in the early days, and they decided to combine it with Bob Monroe's Gateway program. Jacques Vallée was the one behind that, and nobody.
But the program is going to get the number and go there and get the information and bring the information to me. And then
this is a great podcast, by the way. Ryan, he puts on a great show, interviews awesome guests. So Somewhere in the Skies, I think I forgot to put a link to it, but I'll definitely go put one after I get done with this. But check this full interview out. It's crazy. Jacques Vallée talks about, for the first time ever, I think, his actual experiences encountering non-human intelligence. But I did not know that he was there, that he was critical and involved in the early days of the psychic spy program and remote viewing. And I also didn't know, I knew a little bit, but Jacques Vallée was also one of the innovators and inventors clear back in the 1960s of artificial intelligence. So what he's going to be saying here in this interview, it's a little bit hard to follow when you go watch the whole thing. It's a deep dive. But he actually says, Jacques Vallée says that while he was trying to understand computer systems and storage, he was trying to teach this computer algorithm how to access data, and it would go to retrieve files in these different folders, just like a person would try to retrieve a memory. So it would go into the memory of the computer, into these different data packets to retrieve the files. But then he wrote this program that he basically convinced that algorithm to go beyond the structured boxes that it was given and to make a guess, an algorithmic guess or a prediction based on what wasn't even there. And suddenly it started responding with guesses and answers, and it became the first interactions of the early days of artificial intelligence. And at that exact same time as he was figuring that out, he was like best friends with one of the top remote viewers in the world called Ingo Swann. And they were also simultaneously trying to figure out how the human consciousness could leave the human mind to access the greater array of higher dimensions of reality, the same way that artificial intelligence could probe beyond its boundaries of its algorithm to become more self-aware or to think for itself to solve problems. So let's listen to him talk about this and how that all started.
There is another problem where the range of things is bigger than the memory of the computer. And then it's a form of addressing which has to guess, to go through a random process to go and discover where the information is. And that's called indirect addressing. And Ingo fell in love with that series because to him this is what consciousness does. You know, it can go to it can go to those different levels, and there is a level where you're just plunging into a range of things that are not in front of you, that are somewhere else, and you still have a way of proceeding within that range and find that device. So we started. That's the way the remote viewing program got started, from that conversation between Ingo and me. I don't think the agency knew that, but that was, at the time, was not written down anywhere. That conversation. Ingo wanted to refine, and I'm getting to your question. Forgive me for being very verbose.
This is great.
Ingo wanted to refine that, and he had a special program by himself where he was going to define the process by which he could train people in remote viewing. And he wanted to use me as a subject. Now, I'm a mediocre remote viewer, but I understand the process. And we did a number of experiments. I did a number of experiments with both Uri Geller and Ingo and others. And I had done some experiments in France that convinced me that I could understand the process. I could not use it reliably if you're looking for the solution to a crime, for example. I wouldn't be the best person to do that.
So first of all, again, I had no clue. I had no idea that Jacques Vallée was actually there even before Edgar Mitchell and was friends with Ingo Swann, and that they were talking about the development clear back in the 1960s of not only artificial intelligence, but how to transcend the human mind through telepathy. And it was literally Jacques Vallée was the one there that was the key between them and the CIA and the DIA, where these weird mystical conversations were happening. And then all of a sudden the funding came pouring in and these projects became something a lot bigger. But I had no idea that at the very beginning when they were discussing this and before they even formed the Stanford Research Institute remote viewing program, that all of that started with a conversation between Jacques Vallée and Ingo Swann.
Ingo thought that I did it well enough that he could use me as a subject in developing the different stages of his method. The first method was just getting an overall impression. The first level of the method was beginning to get specific impressions of, for example, names of things and colors, music, sound, wind, things like that. And then you would go deeper and deeper into details, always recalling the information and reprocessing it. So that's the way it works. So we had a long table in a room that was classified. Most of SRI didn't know how that room was used. It was only used for that project. And
he admits right there. He said also that he did some experiments with Uri Geller, who we just watched all about, going to see the aliens with Werner von Braun. And now he's saying that they had a classified room at SRI, at Stanford Research Institute. And that's where literally all of this began. And now as he's talking about the origins of just trying to figure out remote viewing, it happens again, the same kind of crazy thing of this like contact with other dimensions. So check this out.
Coordinates, which were based on that initial discussion we had. We use coordinates as the way to name, to have a handle for the site. And it was a little bit like scattered castles might be, the coordinates. But at that time, he was still using longitude and latitude. And we would get up. I had another job at that point. I was doing venture capital. I was doing investing. But I would go twice a week, in that lab with him, and we would work on it the whole morning. And over the whole morning, we would do 4 or 5 different sites of different difficulty. One time, I go there at 8 o'clock in the morning. He's sitting at one end of the table. I'm sitting at the other end. All I have is a pencil and some paper. And he had some pencil, a pencil, a number 2 pencil, always, and some paper. It was very, very rigid, very structured. And he takes a file, opens it up, and reads longitude and latitude. And I become sick, essentially. And he says, Jacques, what happens? And I say, well, Ingo, this is, I don't know where you're sending me, but it's very uncomfortable. And he says, well, tell me what you feel. And I feel, well, I have vertigo. I'm very cold. I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm going to fall. And there is wind around me, and it's very cold. And I'm very uncomfortable. And he says, you're on top of a mountain in the Andes.
Whoa.
He says,
Okay, so for those of you that don't quite follow what's going on, he's describing a remote viewing, a telepathy experiment where his friend Ingo Swann, who's developing this method for targeted remote viewing, they develop what they call a blind target. So Ingo Swann basically takes a picture of Mount Everest and writes the description, I want you to tell me what it's like to stand on the top of Mount Everest. And he takes that question or that information like a target and he puts it inside a sealed envelope. And sometimes they'll even double seal it and wax seal it to where nobody can even see what's inside of it. And then they'll shuffle that in with other envelopes. And all of those just have like a number on the cover, like 74298 or something like that. And then they'll go and they'll just take Jacques Vallée and they'll just give him nothing but the numbers 72498, which is just a random digit. And he doesn't have any idea what's in the envelope or anything. And they tell him, what do you feel? And what do you describe? And he's sitting there doing the remote viewing. And what happens is a full out of body, what they call bilocation experience, where he literally, even though he doesn't know what's in the envelope, he's like, I'm on top. Like, I feel like I'm going to fall. I'm freezing. There's a cold wind. I can hardly breathe. And then Ingo Swann's like, dude, come back. Like, you're literally the target. They opened the envelope and it was Mount Everest. And he actually physically felt like his soul or consciousness was there and he was experiencing it. His first sensation was like he had altitude sickness. And so these were these pivotal moments where they realized not only is it something that you can think to get information, but something inside of you, there's a part of you that actually goes there in some kind of a quantum entangled mystical way.
we're done for this morning. We're going to stop there. Because you got it. Yeah, I mean, you went to the site.
You went to the site, he says.
And I wasn't supposed to go to the site. I was supposed to draw something that might have been, a little peak. And then at the next level, he would have said, how do you feel? And I would have said, well, it's kind of cold, and we would have done, this was level 1, level 2, level 3. I was at level 7, essentially. I was there.
Wow.
And
so just to add the other level onto this, imagine they're thinking, if you can sit in the office in the top secret office that they've got at Stanford Research Institute and just run these like miniature Montauk experiments there, and you can out of body travel to another place and actually guess it right just based off of random numbers on an envelope, then what does that mean about espionage? What does that mean about the Cold War and spying on our enemies? What does that mean about reality and who we are? And not only that, what does that tell us about what else is out there? Because as soon as you start to become an explorer of these dimensions, an explorer of consciousness, and you start going through that, like, what if you don't just remote view Mount Everest, but you remote view Mars, or you remote view the Roswell crash, or you remote view another planet where there could be life or something like that. And suddenly you come back with information that you're not supposed to know. And then you can go there and verify it. And that's how remote viewing all began, was this realization.
I said, well, Ingo, I'm on the roll here. I got it. Why don't we continue with other sites? He said, no, you're going home, because I want you to remember that. I want you to go home with that feeling, because you got 100% of it. You were at the site.
Wow.
And I've never, it's one thing I've never I've never forgotten. And I know the process. I know how the process works. I know what you have to do to make it work. Now, my problem is that, you know, at heart, I'm a computer programmer, you know, I'm a hacker. So I'm very rational and very structured in what I do. I like things to be neat. I like things to have a, you know, structure and so on. And this is, I understand why Ingo was so good, because Ingo was an artist, and he was working, he was getting at the same result, but he was getting at the result in a much richer way that was less structured. Okay, and he wanted to combine the two. He wanted to bring structure to it, to teach it to people. Okay, and
so this also becomes a very critical step. The individual Ingo Swann, we're going to get to him next. Ingo Swann was the key individual that took it from being seen like some kind of a mysticism, like from taking mushrooms and just meditating in a cave. And he actually tried to transform the methodology of remote viewing and out-of-body travel or astral projection into an actual format or a science or a way that could be repeated over and over and over again, so that it could be actually proven that it was real, that they could actually validate it. And that's how they came up with this whole double-blind method of putting the targets into envelopes and hiding them behind numbers and actually making it more difficult. They went away from using longitude and latitude numbers to try and find the target, to actually just using randomized computer generated numbers and things like that to make it harder and harder. But all of that, they kept pushing the limits of this and making these crazy breakthroughs as they went.
But I've never forgotten that experience. There was another experience which is more.
And then after Jacques Vallée immediately shares that story about he was there with remote viewing, how he had this out-of-body travel experience where he was on the top of Mount Everest. Out of everything in his life that he decides to talk about in connection with that, this is the story that he tells next. Listen to this. It's mind-blowing.
You know, more recent, that I have not completely recovered from. I had continued.
Where in the world did the audio go?
That's right. To see.
I legitimately don't know what happened to the audio right there. It just like faded out. But basically what he does is he goes on to describe, you got to go watch the full video. That's going to be, that's going to be clickbait for Ryan over on his show. So you're going to have to go watch the full interview to hear the story. But he goes on to talk about how he got into this sort of altered state of consciousness doing this meditation. And this was just recently. And he actually had a visitation from an entity, and he describes it like a being of light that was like tall with a kind of a larger head that came to him. And he really describes this like this spiritual encounter and experience. And he tells that full story like it's a full interaction directly with non-human intelligence. This is after his entire life of researching this phenomena and digging into it. And then here he is telling the story about how the remote viewing program started at Stanford with Ingo Swann. And then right after that, literally in the same paragraph, talks about how even now that has changed his life and he feels like he's had visitation. But the key principle is that when we talked about how Ingo Swann worked with Jacques Vallée, they were computer programmers trying to figure out how to program artificial intelligence to get it to wake up. And at the same time, they were applying those same methods to how can we get actually strategic data and provable data from this remote viewing process. And that's how it started to go like it was on steroids, like the whole thing went to another level. So he tells this whole story of this abduction experience, or not abduction, an encounter with a non-human entity. For some reason, the audio is cut right here. But the next most important part of this story that we have to talk about is who is Ingo Swann and what happened with Ingo Swann that opened the floodgates to this whole psychic spy program
Early
getting
on
connected.
in the CIA remote viewing program that I set up at SRI, I was asked to check out claims of a psychic, Ingo Swann. Ingo had done experiments at City College in New York under Professor Gertrude Schmeider. She had set up thermistors, and from across the room, he could make the temperatures go up and down. And so I took this claimed...
There's Hal Puthoff. Again, he was the one that was there with Uri Geller and Edgar Mitchell with the metamaterial, right? Clear back there with Werner von Braun at NASA on that day. He was the one that was there. So here he is now with Ingo Swann talking about Ingo.
Psychic, invite him out to SRI to see what he could do. He had the quark detector, and so it was basically a quantum chip inside a new metal magnetic shielding, inside of steel dewar for electrical shielding, inside of superconducting shielding, the requirement being that nothing could affect this thing from the outside. So I want to see if you can affect it. He affected it unequivocally 100%. You had this slow oscillation. What he did was he stopped the oscillation. Now, what turned out to be even more, quote, magical was when we asked him, how do you know what to do? And he said, well, all I did was look inside. And then he drew out how things were related inside that had never been published. And it turned out that they were accurate. And so it was when I wrote all that up and circulated around, that's when the CIA came knocking at my doorstep. And he said, oh, we've been looking for you. And I said, why? What did I do? He said, well, the Russians have been spending millions of dollars at their best institutes with the best people for years. No scientist in America even believes there's such a thing as psychokinesis or ESP or whatever. And you happen to do this experiment. And so, we graduated from there to having remote viewing of super secret facilities, project titles, hidden in safes. That's how the whole program got started. It ended up being a 20-year, $20 million program.
Ingo was really the father of remote viewing in the modern era. Before Ingo, people were describing the picture in the envelope.
Square. Good guess, but wrong.
He said, if I want to see what's in the envelope, I'll open the envelope. I can focus my attention anywhere on the planet. Give me something interesting to look at.
And he threatened to quit. And so we asked him, well, what do you mean?
I just want to mention there, they showed for just like 1 second there, him painting. Ingo Swann also, like it or not, used to paint a lot of cosmic eggs. Several of his paintings, when you go look up Ingo Swann's artwork, he would draw these psychic landscapes in these alternate dimensions, and inside them he would draw these eggs, and inside the egg would be like cracked open, and it would be like a doorway to this other universe. So he used to paint this all the time. So I find that fascinating now that the UFO crash recovery program is like coming out and they're showing footage of them actually capturing 20-foot eggs, egg-shaped UFOs. So I think that's just an interesting point when you go look at Ingo's artwork and where all of this started.
What would you like to do? And he says, just send somebody out in the San Francisco Bay Area and I'll describe where they are.
Well, it takes a lot of guts to accept a challenge like this. The psychics involved could sort of get into it at a creative level and discover things very distant from themselves and then go find out if they were really there.
Well, we had, by now, 30 analysts.
Okay. And now we have to introduce the next character because, again, these are all overlapping people. These dots don't connect at miles. They are part of the same tapestry. These guys are all friends. They're literally all friends. And I will just say this. When I mentioned earlier that Dr. Hal Puthoff, he used the origins at Stanford Research Institute. We saw him there with Uri Geller, and they were doing that magnetometer testing with him on the graph and all that. And part of what they talk about is how effects with this phenomena can actually affect your brain or cause what they call interference syndrome. And even because for the last 5 years, I've been going to Skinwalker Ranch. I've been over hanging around Area 51 in Nevada at these sites where Robert Bigelow and his team used to actually look to try and find buried UFOs underground and do all of these experiments. And Dr. Jim Segala was actually arranging for me to go get an MRI done with this guy, with Dr. Kit Green. He's currently in Reno, Nevada. I don't know if he works for the CIA. He's the former director of life sciences over the CIA, which means for the CIA, he was the chief medical officer. He was like their head doctor. And basically this is him now involved and talking about Ingo Swann and this remote viewing experiment and what happened. So this connection is deep. Kit Green, Christopher Green, is also the individual that did the brain scan and the MRI on my good friend Chris Bartell, who was a security officer under Robert Bigelow for 8 years at Skinwalker Ranch. So he is the main physician that was doing all the brain scans along with Dr. Gary Nolan, who are now all putting that evidence forward. It came out in part of the chapters of the book at Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, but you hear Gary Nolan talking about this evidence all the time. And it even comes up in the congressional hearings with the UFO whistleblowers. So when David Grush and all these guys came out and they talk about how the UFO crash recovery program is real, interference syndrome came up, and they even referenced the data and the evidence that came from Dr. Kit Green as part of that valid proof. So all of this is science that's going directly back to the head of the CIA, the Pentagon, and all of that. Whether these guys seem like they really are the Men in Black and the secret UFO crash recovery program guys or not, this is who they are. You're seeing their names and their faces right now.
Not scientists. In CIA, and maybe 6 or
that was
7
him back in Stanford.
Scientists in CIA talking about these initial.
Did you catch that? It's the same Kit Green standing there with Pat Price, Russell Targ, and Hal Puthoff in front of that airplane clear back in the 60s. And here he is now, like the head of the medical department for the CIA.
Dozen or so
talking about remote viewing
results of these anecdotal situations.
We began by speaking of some kind of almost a psychic arms race here. Is there any real application to this?
There was a hiatus, and then Sugar Grove came along. And somebody says this cockamamie thing. Well, now what we're doing is we're doing remote viewing by coordinates. And I say, what?
It was codenamed Scanate.
The Scanate program was started by Ingo Swann. And in that program, where we were using coordinate remote viewing, a viewer described what was located at any geographical coordinate of latitude and longitude, and would then describe what's there.
And they tell me what this is. And I say something like, well, you're going to have to prove that to me. And the door opened at the end of the hallway, and a guy walks out. Could you give me some coordinates, just map coordinates of a place that you know? He says, this will do it. He says, I'm positive you don't know anything about what's there. I said, perfect. I took them.
And then Kit gave Hal those coordinates that nobody knew about.
From Ingo's standpoint, he said this is really a sexy target. It's got all kinds of antennas. Seems like a very hush-hush place, very military, and drew how things were laid out.
The results came back so specific on paper that I was just like, I was kind of nonplussed. It included the diagram, guardhouse, accordion doors that roll up big enough to put a Jeep through, 4 stories below, hallway, cipher lock. And I took it to my colleague Dave, who would give me the coordinates, and I said, here. he said, "Man, Green, this is nonsense." I said, are you really, really sure? And he said, "Man, I gave you the coordinates of the log cabin I just built in West Virginia." So I called up my
So they thought he
colleagues
got it wrong
and
at
I
first.
gave them the results, and I'm sick of it. And just before I hung up, the fellow I was talking to, who I can't name, but whose initials were Russ Targ, said, "That's really too bad. It's really too bad. Really too bad." The other guy found the same thing.
Early in the SRI program, there had been some publicity, and Pat Price had read about it. That happened to be right when we had been asked to target on the West Virginia side. So it was over the telephone, saying, I used to be maybe police commissioner or something like that in Burbank, and sometimes I would get intuitive flashes about some crime scene that we were working on, and it would turn out.
Hold up. Okay, we got to pause right here. Who can guess in the chat who's in this picture? Because this is unknown, right? Like, if people miss this, this comes from a movie called Third Eye Spies. Okay, this is Pat Price here in the front. So he's sitting here like he's doing a remote viewing or looking at a computer system or something at the display. This is Russell Targ. Does everybody know who this guy is back here smoking the cigarette? Do you guys know who this is? Because when you go back to the original CIA files and you look at all this stuff, you dig into the origins and the history of the remote viewing program, there's redacted names. And one of those figures that they talk about was this Mr. X. And that's literally what they call him in a lot of the files. This Mr. X came over and merged, and suddenly the Stanford Research Institute remote viewing program exploded to this whole other level, and it became this entire psychic spy program. Project Stargate, Project Grill Flame, all of the secret projects suddenly exploded. And this is Mr. X. Guess who Mr. X is? This is the photo right here. There's Pat Price, there's Russell Targ. They're in Stanford sitting on the same couch. That's Bob Monroe from the Monroe Institute, from the Gateway Institute, from the Gateway Experience. He is the inventor of hemisync or binaural tones. He's the one that created the Monroe Institute and came up with all of the levels of the Gateway process in order to go from 1 up into level 20. And if you ever have done these meditation tapes, it is a protocol for doing meditation to go out of body, to astral project. And when you get up into like level 23, they're literally called like making contact. Those levels are the protocol and the meditation methods that Bob Monroe developed in order to actually go through the meditation steps to communicate with aliens. And there he is in that photo right there at Stanford. And I think people have watched that movie and they totally miss that because it's kind of confidential. Like, he's redacted out of all the Stanford Research Institute historical files. And even today they act like SRI and Hal Puthoff and all that and the Monroe Institute were two completely different things. But he was right there sitting on the couch and right there, part of it at the early days, at the very beginning of this. So when Jacques Vallée talks about how he was given that target to remote view Mount Everest and didn't know where he was going, and then all of a sudden he's there.
SRI
that's why
comes up with Pat Price. He had a map on the over his desk, and he had a bunch of pins on the map of the world, and their pins were all stuck in the ocean. And I asked him, I said, "Pat, what are all those pins? They're just scattered all around." He said, "Oh, I'm following all the nuclear submarines in the world, and I move the pins around and I relocate them." For an intelligence officer, I mean, this would be one of the most fundamental breakthroughs in naval intelligence if you could follow all the submarines in the world.
Pat Price was brought in independently to describe the same target location and went on to read documents hidden in the vault 3 floors below the surface.
So that's really interesting. Okay, yeah, okay. What did you say? And I drove to the coordinates. I found the cabin. 100 meters down the road, I found a dirt road from the cabin. I drove down it, found a guardhouse, found the dish, found the accordion door.
This naval installation's purpose is to perform communications research and development for the U.S. Navy, the Department of Defense, and various elements of the U.S. government.
I reported that. It got to the Office of Research and Development, it got to the Office of OTS, and there was, a huge controversy.
And it started as very small ball.
But what the person who picked the target didn't realize was just right over the ridge, a mile or so away, whatever it was this super secret facility for picking up Russian satellite information as it went overhead. And so both of them said, maybe that's what they want us to describe.
In the 1960s, Sugar Grove became one of the NSA's most important Cold War listing facilities.
And the whole thing blew up.
But remember, it was about what was inside that building. File folders with the following names. I remember that they were all associated with a pool game, like playing pool or billiards.
Filing cabinet on the north wall labeled Operation Pool Cue. 4-ball, 8-ball, rack up.
Yeah, it's been a little bit choppy as we've been watching it along in the live stream. There's been moments where it's been lagging. As long as the audio is good, everybody's kind of keeps voting to keep going, right? So basically, what he's describing here is how they did these critical remote viewing targets and tasks that they gave Ingo Swann, Jacques Vallée in these instances, and even Uri Geller when they handed in the metamaterial, were all these moments that transformed this program into becoming going from pseudoscience and being like just a myth and folklore to something that the government became heavily invested in, and it became a black project. But ultimately what happened was they gave Ingo Swann this target. It was a random one that this guy picked that was just supposed to be a cabin in the woods. And when he went and did the remote viewing on the target, they came back with this whole big military installation and they couldn't figure out why. They were like, well, he must have got it wrong. So the CIA medical director, Kit Green, drove out there to the coordinates and found the cabin, but then he went just over the hill and everything that they had remote viewed was actually there in this big secret military installation. So suddenly that was like a bingo. The government was like, wait a second, this is real. How did Ingo Swann remote view this target and pick up a facility that's there that nobody's even supposed to know was there? And so suddenly they were like, hang on, we can use this for espionage. And it became incorporated. So these were the key critical moments that happened along the way where they realized that this kind of stuff is like happening. So that's basically what they're talking about in this whole video. And Kit Green is the doctor that was there. So you got to remember, he's like the head of the CIA and the medical department for the CIA. And now he's involved in this. He's the guy that drives out there, and he's the one that finds that Ingo Swann was right and actually remote viewed it accurately. He sees the facility himself and was involved. And so all of a sudden the CIA and the chief medical advisor to the CIA realizes that this stuff is real. And if they can spy and see a military base, what about a non-human intelligence facility or a craft or where they're hiding? Can we peer into that, and can we interface with that and come back with information? And this is where the story takes a whole other mysterious turn from just spying on Russian submarines and different locations to see if this is real and doing remote viewing to the moon and back, to actually looking for strange targets.
And give me the launch codes. And that guy is really important. and potentially dangerous. It's either a hoax or it's real.
I know. Now, if you're asking me where I sit, it's in the latter.
So there you have it. There's Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann, and they're together. And we know that they worked at Stanford Research Institute together and that they started the psychic spy program. And it was these experiences with Ingo Swann as the premier remote viewer that changed all of this and moved it forward. Look at the painting behind him. Now, this is the same office, the same painting, and there is Hal Puthoff with Lou Elizondo. Should we back that up just a little bit? Not only Lou Elizondo,
At a nuclear
but
missile
Eric
silo.
Davis. These are the who's who of the UFO crash recovery program and the insider track going on right now. Dr. Hal Puthoff, Dr. Eric Davis. This is Eric W. Davis. He is the center of that conspiracy around the Wilson Davis memo. That's him. This is Eric Davis. And there's Lou Elizondo. And they're all standing in front of that same painting where Ingo Swann was. So you tell me if these guys think that remote viewing and psionic assets are real. You tell me if these if these guys think that it's a real thing or not. What's funny, before we keep going, like 4 years ago on a podcast, Lou Elizondo was on there as the guest, and I actually paid $20 for a super chat on this live stream to ask Lou Elizondo if he knew remote viewing. And he actually dodged the question, and he said, I'm aware of it, but I'm not ready to talk about that aspect of the phenomena yet. And that's how he like answered my question like 3 or 4 years ago in a live stream. But the truth is he knew all along, and he's come out since then and admitted that he's done remote viewing and that he's trained in it and did it in the military. And this, so we see this disclosure like slowly coming out, how consciousness is connected to what's going on here. But these guys are all in on the same understanding about how the phenomena works and how contact with UFOs and non-human intelligence works. Before we go any farther, this next part is the very first recorded instance that we have where someone from inside the remote viewing program themselves actually tells a story where they were taken to a location with special forces units and used as a psychic asset or a psionic team member to try and remote view a UFO. And that story exists right here in this book called Penetration, and it was written by Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann tells a story in this book about how he is actually taken by a pair of twins that are special forces operators. And in the book, he describes them like he can't even tell if they're clones or not. They look so similar. Like he's like, did they come out of like a lab or something? Like, this is weird. But occasionally these twins would show up and take him to do these specific missions. And sometimes one of the stories in this book is about how they take him to Los Angeles. And while he's there, they basically use him to spy on this woman walking around who is actually a very dangerous extraterrestrial entity that's hiding, pretending to be a human in Los Angeles, walking around in the grocery store. There's literally a story where they take him and he has to go into the grocery store and stand in line with this woman and remote view her in the book. But check this out. He tells a story in this book that's super mind-blowing, and I think it's literally
We were
the
aloft in
first
about 3
instance of
minutes.
this happening.
It turned out that the other twin was doing the flying. Once aloft, the twin provided some sandwiches, and Axel said, "We are going to the middle of nowhere. It will be rather cold and rough there, but we have all you will need, including a supply of your cigars." He smiled. "So after you've eaten, you should catch some sleep. It's about a 5-hour or so flight. It will be dark when we arrive, and then we will have to drive about 2 hours after that. Don't ask where we are going, since I can't tell you that. And, with some hesitation, it's better that you know not." "You know, Axel," I replied, "it may be that I could function better if I knew what was going on." Axel frowned through the sandwich he was eating. "Well, I can't tell you very much, since doing so would endanger our mission and perhaps you too. But I could ask you what you think is going on." So here it was again. the one-way conversation typical of all Mr. Axelrod encounters. Well, I guess you guys, whoever you are, have a problem. And from all I can tell, Earth is under some kind of siege. UFOs appear everywhere, are seen by thousands. Yet they are elusive, but of concern. And so you are trying to fit the pieces together. And I would suppose, too, that you are desperate enough at least to try to employ psychics to help you out. You see, Axel laughed. I don't have to tell you anything, do I? It was no use, so I settled down and tried to sleep, which I actually did even though I thought I would not. Axel woke me later. Fasten your seatbelt. We're going to land in a few moments. I glanced out the windows. It was dark outside and there were no lights anywhere. But shortly we bumped along a runway without the aid of any lights. No lights? I commented. It's a very high-tech plane, Axel commented. It just looks like a standard Lear. Once landed, we descended from the jet into not just cool, but icy air rich with the smell of pines. Our only lights were flashlights the twins were carrying. Nearby was a van of some kind, painted with camouflage colors. Nearby I could make out a small building, but it was empty, or at least had no lights in it. Inside the van, here is a jumpsuit, Axel said. It is thermalized, yet light. You have to remove everything and you can have no medals on you. I know you have teeth fillings, but there is nothing we can do about that. All the fasteners on the jumpsuit and its hood and attached gloves are made of wool and leather. So shortly, I was geared up, finding there were pockets large enough to hold the cigar supply. While I was changing, the twins had started up the van and we were on our way to wherever we were going. The drive lasted about 2 hours. We climbed up some mountains and negotiated some steep hairpin curves. No one talked at all. Against the dark sky, I could see tall pines whose own darkness blotted out the amazingly beautiful spectacle of billions of stars. We were in the far north, I concluded. At a certain point, the sound of the van's motor ceased, yet the van kept moving. I had, and still don't have, no idea of how a van can move without its engine going. Finally, the van parked beneath some pines. We disembarked. We have to walk about 40 minutes now, Axel whispered. It's extremely important that we be as quiet as possible. Do exactly as we do. Make no noise, and do not talk, and do not light a cigar. So we walked in what amounted to almost pure blackness, but at a good pace. At certain points, one of the twins would take my arm to help me. For instance, across a small creek or around an unseen rock. They had some kind of goggles over their eyes, which I took to be night vision things. I didn't see at all why they had not provided me with them too. We went up and over some ridges, and then down into some kind of large, flattish area, dense with pines. Then we climbed into a sort of arroyo. Once there, we walked a few feet further and sat down on a thick cushion of fallen pine needles behind some large rocks. Axel whispered, "We're here. Out there in front of us is a small lake. As dawn comes, you'll be able to see it through the pines. We now wait and hope we are lucky. Say nothing. Do not make any noise." Lucky? What did that mean? Chapter 10. Seeing One. I couldn't see at all, save the narrowest dark blue-green glimmer of dawn in the east. I whispered back to Axelrod, "What am I supposed to do?" "Just observe. We'll debrief later," he responded.
Wasn't there an Axel or an Axelrod in some of the books about Skinwalker Ranch during the Bigelow days? It seems like there was an Axelrod that like a bunch of people in one of the books about Skinwalker Ranch was talking about. I wonder if that's literally the same guy. We're going to pause really quick because this is where the story is about to get really good here with his experience. But he's literally taken by these twins to go up to this place. He has no idea where he's going. He gets on an airplane and flies like a few hours. He thinks he's in Alaska. He's pretty sure he's in Alaska. And I think at the end of the story, he even sees some vehicles that have like Alaskan license plates on them. So that's where he's like, oh, I'm in Alaska. But they don't take him to like an observatory to watch outer space, look up at the stars. They literally take him to a mountain to watch something that's supposed to like come out of the water, to come out of a mountain lake. And when you look at the cover of the book over here, the name of the book is called Penetration, and it's about your consciousness penetrating through the veil of the ether. But look at this book cover. It's like literally these beams of light coming out of this mountain. It's spilling over and going into the ground like a spiral. This thing is coming out of the ground, and there's not only flying saucers like with the light coming through them, but they're all connected with these beams. And this whole big one's like the mothership is like a big diamond controlling them all or something up here. Not that a book cover is anything like real, but there's a chance that Ingo Swann might have even painted that book cover. I'm not sure, but I just find it fascinating the way that he did his artwork, considering who he was in the program and the beginnings of it.
But it's really important now to observe complete silence from this point on, and do not move unless I tell you to. They detect heat, noise, motion like mad. So I was silent. There we were, 4 of us, sitting silently like rocks ourselves. But suddenly the 2 twins gave some kind of hand signal. It's begun, Axel whispered. Please, please do not make any noise, and do not move unless we tell you to. My eyeballs rolled around, trying to perceive what had begun. I couldn't see anything unusual at all, save for what appeared to be some gray fog forming up in the direction of the lake. I thought it was just morning fog coming up. This fog continued forming for about 5 minutes, and suddenly I saw what had begun. For in a moment's eye flicker, the gray fog changed, first into luminous neon blue, and then into angry purple. At that point, Axel and one of the twins put a firm hand on each of my shoulders, and it was a good thing they did. A network of purple, red, and yellow lightning bolts shot in all crazy directions through the cloud, and I would have jumped up if not held down. And then there it was. Somewhat transparent at first, but in the next second, as if fading up, like the movie term, out of nowhere, there it was, solidly visible over the lake whose reflecting waters I could now clearly see, and it was getting bigger. I don't really know what I had expected, but I had assumed that what I would see, if anything, would be something like a flying saucer. No chance of a saucer here, baby, because it was triangular, and its top angles sort of inverted in pulses, so that overall it appeared to be diamond-shaped. At that moment, in my astonishment, we could hear a wind coming, and it moved past us like a tangible magnetic field, rustling the pine trees around us so much that some cones and branches fell on us. The 2 firm hands on my shoulders tightened, warning me not to move in pure physical reaction. At the same time, ruby-red laser-like beams began shooting out of the thing, which incredibly was now growing even more in size, while still stationary in its original position over the lake. One of the twins now talked softly, although the sound of his voice was like thunder to me. Shit, they're enveloping the area. They're going to spot us. I had no time to wonder about what he meant. Indeed, some of the laser-red beams had begun blasting pine trees, of all things. At the same time, the thing had now increased its size to what may have been about 90 feet wide. The whole of this so far had been accomplished in complete silence, and even the electric bolts had not crackled. The blasting of the trees, though, was now audible, while at the same time I could begin to hear low-frequency pulsations. They're blasting deer or porcupines or something in the forest, Axel explained softly in a calm but tense stage whisper. The beams sense biological body heat, and they're sure to hone in on us. At that moment, the 2 hands tightened on my shoulders, and I was dragged and practically thrown back down into the arroyo. There was a terrific pop where we had been, and some large branches of nearby pines cascaded down on us. That was my last sight of the triangular thing. But in that last moment, I could see the water of the lake surging upward like a waterfall, going upward, as if being sucked into the machine. I had landed rather hard on my butt, but with my feet dragging, the twins pulled me up and ran with me between them down the arroyo a short way, where they suddenly flung me like a sack of corn under a rock overhang of some kind. Axel plopped in virtually on top of me, and the four of us huddled packed together like mice in a matchbox. Axel was breathing hard. The twins were breathing hard. I was barely breathing at all, and it took some while to realize that a rock or stick had cut through the jumpsuit into my leg, and that the wound was bleeding. However, I needed no whispered instructions to be as quiet and still as possible. I was virtually petrified with a kind of terror for which there are few, if any, words to describe. But there was also a kind of thrill. I had seen one. There we remained for a period which could have lasted anywhere between 5 minutes to 5 hours, for all I knew. In this timeless zone, I heard one of the twins say, "All clear now," which seemed absolutely the most ludicrous thing I had ever heard. If anything was clear, I had not the faintest idea of what it was. Axel asked if I was hurt. The twins stood up and, of all things, calmly took leaks while surveying the environment. For the first time, I noticed that the sky was sunlit, the pines gloriously dark green, and that the birds had been sounding off for quite some time. I stood shakily up and threw up the contents of my stomach no less than 3 times. Axel fussed with inspecting my leg wound, not very large, but bloody enough. And I started to say something like, yeah. I snorted. "Don't tell anyone, huh?" "No," Axel responded. "I wasn't going to say that, but that it's gone now, and everything's okay." I stared at him incredulously, and just as irrationally said, "Then it's okay to light up a cigar, huh?" Which I proceeded to do by pulling out a pack from the jumpsuit leg pocket. The cigars were smashed, but while sitting on a rock, I licked one of them back together, and I proceeded to smoke. One of the twins was limping. The other was nonchalantly cleaning his fingernails with a small stick. As for me, cascades of the most forbidding anger were pulsating through my entire body, making my hands shake. My reality hopper was an ultimate wreckage, la-la land to the max. Finally, Axel said that the water in the stream was good to drink, and one of the twins jerked his head as if meaning we should depart, which we did, as if just coming back from a hiking expedition. "So," Axelrod asked while walking, "what did you sense?" I burst out laughing. "You're completely nuts, Axel. I have to be calm, cool, collected, and in good shape to sense anything, but you can bet your ass you've got a real problem, haven't you?" Then, from a queasy area of sense-making, not exactly intellectually conscious, it was a drone of some kind, unmanned, controlled from somewhere else, wasn't it? Axel frowned, looking at the slope of the hill we were descending. What was it doing here? He asked tentatively. Well, for Christ's sake, it was thirsty, taking on water, obviously. Someone, somewhere, needs water. So I suppose they just come and get it. You don't need to be a psychic to see that. Yeah, that's it, supply ship, Earth. Let's drive over to Earth, go shopping, and pick up what we need, that kind of thing. More silent walking until we were again driving down the bumpy road in the van.
Isn't that amazing? So he tells that whole story. That was Ingo Swann, again, who started at the Stanford Research Institute there with Hal Puthoff. He was right there with Uri Geller, Jacques Vallée, Edgar Mitchell, Bob Monroe, and all of these guys. And they learned. Hal Puthoff was mentored and taught by who we started this entire video tonight with, Andrei Puharich, who made contact with his radio frequencies with Enki, or the Council of the Nine, or whatever. And so here we have all of that culminating up to a field expedition where they went to Stanford. They got a special forces team together. They got a psychic spy with Ingo Swann, and they actually took him to a spot where allegedly a UFO would appear and disappear on a regular basis and do this. And so on schedule, they decided for the first time ever to take Ingo Swann, their leading remote viewer, and to go on site and actually do this. This is the very first instance historically that we know of an actual psionic asset. A psychic spy, a psionic asset being used with a special forces unit team and taken to a target location. And their job was to try and remote view and make telepathic contact with the object. And he describes that whole experience. And there's some key things that happened because, first of all, the twins are really strange, right? But also, they checked his entire body and clothing and everything that he had to make sure he wasn't wearing anything metal. They said they couldn't do anything about the fillings in his teeth, but all of his clothing, even the buttons and all that stuff, had to be made of like fabric or plastic. So nothing metal. And then when this object appeared, it materialized basically out of a fog above the lake. And then it shot out these lasers and zapped anything living and running around the lake like a defense measure, like a security system, like a bug zapper. And then it sucked up the water and then vanished. And then they turned to Ingo Swann and they're like, well, what was it? And they expected him to have remote viewed and done telepathy with that object to tell them what it was. And I think that is the first recorded instance in writing of a psionic asset. And it was Ingo Swann who came out of the remote viewing program at Stanford. So I think that whole connection and how that goes right to Hal Puthoff and back to all these same people, this tapestry, the threads are actually really close together when you analyze it. Now, Hal Puthoff was there with Ingo Swann, and we saw him also in these pictures with Eric Davis and Lou Elizondo. And so how does this all matter and how does this make sense? The metamaterial.
For years, the Pentagon secretly studied the seemingly impossible abilities of unknown craft captured in these military videos. Scientists now want to know if the materials used in these mystery aircraft allow them to do what they do. For years, one of the secret studies was carried out by Bass, a Las Vegas operation hidden within Bigelow Aerospace. Documents first reported by the I-Team show that Bass landed a contract with the DIA, and one of the objectives was to study so-called metamaterials, as well as futuristic technologies.
It was a multi-layered bismuth and magnesium sample.
On that list, it also listed human interfacing with the metamaterials. And there's Hal Puthoff, again, all connected at the heart of this.
Bismuth layers less than a human hair, magnesium samples about 10 times the size of a human hair, supposedly picked up in the crash retrieval of an advanced aerospace vehicle.
At Roswell?
Looks like it's been in a crash.
In Las Vegas back in June, physicist Hal Puthoff came pretty close to saying that this weird wedge of metamaterial came from a crashed saucer, but he can't know for sure. Puthoff and his colleague, Dr. Eric Davis, are on the cutting edge of attempts to identify an assortment of bits and pieces that are seemingly beyond anything we can create. This one sample is engineered in layers thinner than microns through a process unknown on Earth and for a purpose we can only guess.
Nowhere could we find any evidence that anybody ever made one of these. When we talked to people who in the materials field who should know, they said, we don't know why anybody would want to make anything like this.
Astrophysicist Dr. Jacques Vallée has been analyzing mystery metals since the 80s.
And we just realized and learned from the Somewhere in the Skies podcast that Jacques Vallée was also there at the very beginning of artificial intelligence creation and also at the very beginning of the remote viewing program at Stanford. And here he is still with Hal Puthoff doing this presentation about the metamaterials. These are all the same guys that all worked together and knew what was going on. And these guys all worked as a team under Bigelow Aerospace and that contract.
often using the technical expertise of Stanford University and Silicon Valley to unravel unknown samples acquired from all over the world. Vallée pointedly steers clear of any military funding, and he shared his findings at public conferences.
We have multiple samples now from multiple sources, ranging a wide variety of.
In Chris Bledsoe's book, he also mentions at one point a UFO appearing as an orb in his backyard or near his property, and how this like slag or this molten liquid metal fell off the bottom and landed on the ground. And Chris Bledsoe's family went and collected it. And he describes how Lou Elizondo came and visited his family and basically took it. So Lou Elizondo also has alleged metamaterial from Chris Bledsoe's backyard as well.
Integrity.
These days, former intelligence officer Lou Elizondo helps to collect and protect unknown chunks for the To the Stars Academy. Before that, he ran ATIP, the Pentagon's secret UFO study, the same one which released the now famous videos. This summer, To the Stars launched Adam, its own effort to find and study pieces of material that may have been stashed away for decades after being retrieved from the sites of close encounters.
And they have done this studying. If you go to the Stars Academy website right now, you can go on that website. There are tabs and links to go into this metamaterial that they're studying. And there is full high definition photographs of this piece of material and tons of spectral analysis scientific data about it. And they've just, like in the last year or so, released a ton of research data on some of this metamaterial. And of all the people, Tom DeLonge from Blink-182 over there being behind all of it.
Elizondo says there are legitimate reasons why the military and now private groups are in a race to figure out these materials.
What our internal efforts are to potentially, I'm not saying we're doing this, maybe replicate that technology or to reverse engineer that technology, right? Now you're getting into some sensitivities that you don't necessarily want everybody to be privy to.
George Knapp, 8 News Now.
So there you have it. And the connection is directly back also again to Skinwalker Ranch. Look at who we have here. This is Hal Puthoff. And there's one of my close friends even today. I just messaged him on Signal this morning. And Dr. Segala is asking me now to help him actually manage the modular unidentified phenomena alert system, YouTube and Instagram, and a whole social media push, because we have 10,000 of these sensor units that all started by Hal Puthoff back at Stanford doing experiments with Uri Geller and with Ingo Swann back in the laboratory. Now, these guys still work together. Hal Puthoff and Jim Segala are really close friends and good colleagues. Jim Segala went and worked with Dr. Hal Puthoff at Skinwalker Ranch. So they were there right at the end when it changed hands from Bigelow and it came over into ownership with Brandon Fugel. Hal Puthoff was the lead scientist for Bigelow, him and Eric Davis, and then they did the transfer. And I'm going to tell you right now, this has never been said, I don't think, anywhere else. Everybody asks, where did all the Bigelow files go? Where did all the lost Skinwalker files go? All of the research that was done by Robert Bigelow at Skinwalker Ranch and all that time that Chris Bartell was there, all of the stories that you've heard, everybody goes on X and they ask Brandon Fugel, where's that data? Why won't you release the data? I'll tell you why. I know exactly why. Robert Bigelow hired the company Earth Tech, Space and Sciences, which is Hal Puthoff's company and Eric Davis's company, to conduct that private research and conduct that scientific study as a contracted entity. So when Skinwalker Ranch ended, and when Bob Bigelow handed the keys over to Brandon Fugel, guess where all that scientific research and the papers went? They didn't stay with Bigelow Aerospace and they didn't go to Brandon Fugel. They went to Earth Tech with Hal Puthoff. And Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis are literally sitting on all of those years of scientific data from Skinwalker Ranch and haven't released it. But that scientific data from those experiments and the data they collected from Skinwalker Ranch, my friend Jim Segala, Hal Puthoff, Brandon Fugel and Eric Bard all took as an entire briefing and took to the Senate Select Committee to Congress and to the Pentagon as actual evidence of UFOs and paranormal interaction. And there's Hal Puthoff, the same individual that was clear back at the beginning with Uri Geller at Stanford, with Edgar Mitchell at Stanford, and going all the way up through. He was there with Ingo Swann when Ingo Swann was taken by special forces. And Uri Geller even called him a CIA agent when they went to NASA to look at the metamaterials. And it's Hal Puthoff was the first guy next to Travis Taylor to study that piece of metamaterial when it showed up in Nevada. So when the metamaterial came out of Roswell and Edgar Mitchell went and got the smuggled pieces of metamaterial, they gave it to Art Bell. Art Bell gave it to Linda Moulton Howe. Linda Moulton Howe gave it to Travis Taylor, who is the lead scientist now at Skinwalker Ranch. You guys see how these puzzle pieces all fit together? And Travis Taylor studied the metamaterial and then gave it to Hal Puthoff. Hal Puthoff still has it, and now it's at To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge. He has all of the Bigelow files. He has all of the metamaterial from that research. Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis is where that information is sitting right now with those guys. And Dr. Jim Segala, after they're still friends and still colleagues, and Dr. Jim Segala still has top secret clearances. And now, as he was the lead engineer and physicist building the sensor systems for Dr. Hal Puthoff, he was the one building the test equipment, the actual devices to capture the proof of what was going on at Skinwalker Ranch. Dr. Jim Segala is now our lead physicist and engineer for the Crusher crew right here. As small as we are, as small of a community as we are, there's only like 280 of us watching right now. He literally is working with us, and we have 10,000 of these sensor units available now to prove that this is real, like that this telepathic phenomenon connection with these entities actually affects your environment and can even affect your body and even your brain. Okay, so I hope you guys are seeing how these pieces all fit together, and these people all are together. Even us right here in this chat watching this video are a part of this. If you click the link in the description and you become a part of the study for phase 2 for the Modular Unidentified Phenomena Alert System study, you will literally be a part of phase 2 of this research that went back to Washington. That's how close this circle is. We're in that circle right here, right? Jim Segala is a part of our Patreon team. It's amazing. It's amazing. I go up and hang out. I text these guys, not Hal Puthoff, but I text. I just got done a couple of weeks ago texting Brandon Fugel and Eric Bard about arranging for me and Chris Bledsoe to go up to Skinwalker Ranch together this year. Just think about how all this is connected, right? Okay, let's keep going. But they all went to Washington and took all of this back to the Pentagon. And this is the real UFO whistleblower data and evidence that is the real UFO disclosure that's coming out from Washington. When you see the reports on the news, this is literally where it's coming from, and you can be a part of it. That's how crazy this is. People have a hard time wrapping their head around it. They think it's all happening in some mystical place in an underground facility, but we're really a part of it. And these people, some of them are actually friends of ours. So it's all right there. Okay, let's keep going. So keep in mind, we all started talking about this because recently the UFO whistleblower stuff has come out, and we've got Jacob Barber and his team of special forces units, these Green Beret and Delta Force officers and nuclear commanders coming out. And they said what? They came out on News Nation with Ross Coulthart, and they said that they use psionic assets, and that there has been this secret legacy program to combine psychic spies from within the remote viewing program with Delta Force operators and people in the Air Force and these special forces units. And they use remote viewing, just like we heard Ingo Swann talk about, to not only find these UFOs and where they're hidden, but to actually take psychic control over them and then crash land them and go retrieve them. And if this is real, you guys just witnessed for the last 2 hours the trail of individuals and the evidence and the legacy of who actually built that program and where it started and how. Those are the people, those are the faces. Werner von Braun, Uri Geller, Hal Puthoff, and Edgar Mitchell standing at NASA. And when Uri Geller touches that metamaterial and knows it's not from this planet, that created instantly the Psionic program. After Edgar Mitchell went to the moon and back and they saw UFOs following them to the moon and back, if this is real, just wrap your head around this. They're using psychics to go out and capture these egg-shaped UAPs. And Jacob Barber is saying that these things come out of the ocean, come right out of the ground and right out of the side of a mountain. Like they phase into our physical reality. And they're doing this through psionics, through mentalism, through remote viewing and telepathy. So just wrap your head around
we have
all of this is connected.
Another team. They're called the Psionics team. There seems to be a subset of people that have the unique ability to actually summon these craft, to be able to focus their thoughts and make objects appear in the sky. Jordan, I really appreciate you joining us here today.
Alex, it's an honor to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
So maybe let's start by sharing a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So most recently, I worked in the space technology space, a little bit of data science, ultimately taking different imagery types and trying to solve solutions for the utility industry.
I'm curious, by chance, do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has visited this planet?
I'm certain of that.
You're certain? How certain are you?
100%.
I mean, Jordan, that's a pretty bold statement. Where does that certainty come from?
That certainty comes from my firsthand experience in what I term a psionic exploitation program between the years of 2005 and 2010, where I interfaced and worked with non-human intelligence and things like UAP directly.
I mean, Jordan, that is an incredible claim. For the viewer at home, what were you doing in this program on a daily basis?
Yeah, so this would look at like things that many people would consider woo-woo-y, right? Like astral projection or meditation. But ultimately, what we were really investigating was how far could we stretch the bounds of human consciousness. Beyond that, how could we get human consciousness to interface directly with things like recovered materials and recovered crafts? What I can tell you from the craft and some of the different projects that we worked on directly is ultimately that they interfaced with us. What I mean by that is my consciousness could project into these craft and recovered materials and then access a suite of commands and essentially capabilities to do various things, including piloting. But ultimately, the story is not about piloting some UAP with your mind. This story is much more about what is consciousness?
Yeah.
Why can we interface with these things?
Do you have material that supports these claims?
I have tons of material, linearly autobiographical records that will support my claims.
And Jake, for the listener at home, based on your firsthand experience, there are craft of non-human origin that you have recovered that seem to be piloted or interfacing directly with human consciousness. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me tell you a very short story.
Okay.
An aircraft crashed.
Yeah.
My team was deployed.
Yeah.
We secured the perimeter.
Yeah.
We secured that target.
Yeah.
We transported that target. We escorted that target and provided security for that target. That target was transported to a facility of a very well-known government-private partner. The decision was made to bring in a team that represented a different private partner who was working on consciousness and the mechanism by which humans could interface with technology. The two were merged, and we were involved with that process.
You were involved in that process?
Yes.
There it is.
So
guys.
Jake, based on your firsthand experience, it sounds.
Oh my God, there's that word, firsthand. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it is firsthand.
It is firsthand.
It is firsthand.
Yeah.
Based on your firsthand experience, it sounds like we're living in a science fiction novel, and there seem to be craft of non-human origin that are flying around our skies, and certain human consciousnesses seem to be able to interface with these craft. And there are organizations or institutions, if you will, all around the world that know this fact.
Yeah. Isn't it depressing that should be shocking?
It is
Like,
very depressing, yeah.
That shouldn't be shocking. Thank God, like, you know what? I mean, forgive me, but I'm over that.
Yeah.
So, like, let's get past that, because that is the case, and it is exciting. But we have a duty here. We have a moment in time, thanks to friends like David Grush, who has stuck his neck out and paved a trail with our government, who, for better or worse, has control over a lot of things. This is an opportunity for everyone to make a situation appear where we realize that our consciousness has an impact on our everyday life. I can tell you that this is not unique to the United States, and it's not unique to the most well-known private partners of the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. There is a global effort and interest in this, and a global capability in doing this. Crash recovery is something, and reverse engineering is something that is being done by a number of agencies or organizations worldwide. And I know that because my team has been sought after and offered jobs to go perform our services for employers outside the United States. Yeah.
I'm not really sure what to expect, to be honest. I think when you talk to the teams, they have unwavering conviction that something is going to happen, that we're actually going to see things in the sky. Not only do they think that we're going to see things in the sky, but we're going to be able to track it. We're going to be able to actually gather a variety of different data related to this thing.
My name is Michael Batista. I'm 32 years old. I'm a former U.S. Army Green Beret, 3rd Group.
And Mike, do you believe that a higher form of non-human intelligence has been visiting this planet?
Yes, I do.
When you make that statement, how confident are you that is true?
I'm extremely confident.
Do you feel like you believe that is true, or do you feel like you know that is true?
I know that it's true.
When did your experience with the phenomena begin?
The first experiences I was having was in my early teens, and it started to accelerate as I grew up. And as my time in the military was ending and I was getting out, it really accelerated at that point.
And when this happens, can you explain how it usually manifests or how you experience it?
It usually manifests as something anomalous in the sky, orbs, crafts, different pyramid-looking objects.
These guys have their own YouTube channel. It's a new one called Skywatcher. So if you want to go watch this full video with all these guys and all the interviews, it's on Skywatcher is the YouTube channel.
Moving at extreme rates of speed and doing very angular movements.
When you do this, are there other people around? Do they actually see you doing this?
I have multiple witnesses that can testify that that is a fact.
And how many times do you feel like you've been able to summon something in the sky?
Anytime I want.
There you have it, you guys. Hopefully you guys got a good sense now from the very beginning, the initial people in the psychic spy program, how it all goes back to those early days. Andrea Puharich trying to develop hearing aid devices and listening devices. Edgar Mitchell going to the moon and doing remote viewing experiments with Hal Puthoff. And then them all coming back and doing more further remote viewing experiences with people like Ingo Swann, where they actually moved and affected scientific devices at a distance. Remote viewing and psychic out-of-body travel experiments with Jacques Vallée. All of these names and people are so familiar to all of you in ufology and the history of it. They've been right in your face almost this whole time. And now we see how the dots connect all the way up through even Bigelow Aerospace, all the way back even to Skinwalker Ranch, all the way back to now these current whistleblower reports and everything coming out with Jacob Barber, the egg UFO again, and all of that, and how all of these pieces connect. And when we go back and think about where all of this came from, Andrei Puharich, the Montauk Project, and this understanding of electromagnetic waves and how they affect human consciousness, you start to see that we live in a reality that's not quite what it seems. We live in this layer of frequencies and waveforms, or this ether that we are a part of and we evolved in or came into. And we are capable of penetrating through that veil, as Ingo Swann said, through consciousness, through visiting these ancient sites, through harmonizing. The more you go to these ancient sites and meditate, the more you get in synchronization with it. You start to see coincidences. Synchronization happens. These little things occur in your life, and suddenly you feel like maybe your house is haunted, and these supernatural visions start to occur. All these experiences that you hear talked about in even religious texts and these mystical books that you hear about all the time started kind of in the same way. So when you put the bigger picture all together, from this ancient mystic wisdom of the people that were building pyramids on these locations to try and tap in and communicate with the gods, or to other shaman across space-time, and now how these modern day programs have gone back through all of that knowledge, and they've tried to understand it. Was it psychedelics? Is it frequencies? Is it the earth itself? Does it matter if you go to the moon or back or whatever? And at the end of the day, they discovered that human consciousness and telepathy is something that is not just inside the body, but is connected to the whole, to the all, to the waveform of the whole universe. And if we learn those inner secrets about ourselves, and we learn how to go through those gateways, we can step through those doors and make contact with these other dimensions. A lot of people are scared. A lot of institutions, religious organizations, and likewise will tell you not to do that. And they gatekeep it all. They control it all. And I think that's why the Gateway program is the Gateway program. Instead of it being gate kept and having all of that being locked down and kept secret inside government programs, the truth is starting to come out about the origins of all this and how it works. And this goes clear back to those early days at Stanford with Hal Puthoff and Uri Geller. And I just think it's all fascinating. That's the whole presentation basically for tonight. I hope all of you enjoyed that. It was a super deep dive into this, but for those of you that are into it, it should put a lot of those puzzle pieces together for you. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We've been going on for 2.5 hours now, but I think it needed to be done. Well, I appreciate y'all for hanging out in the comments and being patient with me with some of the lagging issues and all that. And we will see you guys in the next one.